start the recording. There we go. Hopefully that just beeped up on everyone's screen. So we will be recording this presentation for anyone that's not able to join right now. So if there's any people at your societies that want to see this later on, you will be able to do so. And I think we'll probably make it available on the website so you can watch it after the fact. So don't worry about making notes or anything. You'll be able to follow along. So I think without further ado, we might as well get started. So first of all, we're going to introduce the volunteer team. So hi, I'm Tom. I'm the team leader for NRC. This is my third cycle of running NRC. So I've been here a little while. I've also entered NRC as a participant in the past myself. So I think I probably consider a veteran by now. Yanis, who I don't think could be here today, is our vice team lead, who's also been with us for now his second year running the competition and also entered it previously himself. As for our wider volunteer team, obviously, Harry's here with us today, so thank you for joining us, Harry. And we've also got Oscar, George, Sahana, and Udam as part of the team. So hopefully these are names and faces that you'll get familiar with over the course of the year. And then on the competition day, we should all be there, plus many others to help run it. So I'm hoping most people know what NRC is by now, but in case you don't, in case you're completely new, that's absolutely fine. So essentially, NRC is the only UK-sized competition that's even worth considering joining because we are the best. Now, I think it's fair to say we're slightly biased, but there are plenty of good reasons for that. The first one is we are by far the largest competition. So last year we had nearly 50 teams enter at the start of the competition, and we had a similar number the year before that. We are also the oldest competition. So when UK-sized competition started way back when, we were the first one. So there's a lot of heritage there, and all of the competition has been built on that. So as I mentioned, we are the oldest and we are now in our 11th edition. Now, that's actually in our current format, and that's purely what our Google Drive goes back to. I have had conversations with people who've mentioned that it was around in some format, very different, but back in before the year 2000. So we really are one of the oldest competitions, and I think that's evident in the maturity of the competition. As you will see, the documentation is very comprehensive, particularly the technical specification with all the guidance in there. That is a lot of years of work on there, and it's been improved on and worked on ever since. So hopefully this will up to some good standards by now. The big thing about NRC is you do the whole process. So you design it, then you build it, then you launch it. So unlike university projects where you might design something for an entire year with all your colleagues and peers, and then you never do anything with that, absolutely not. The whole point of NRC is to get hands-on and get fun. As we mentioned, whether you're an engineer and you're studying that already, whether you're studying arts, humanities, it does not matter. But the whole point of NRC is to get hands-on experience. So if you're sat there wondering when can you start building the rocket, in theory, there's nothing stopping you starting this design this afternoon and having a prototype built by Monday. The whole point of NRC is to get hands-on. So that's what we really want to emphasize. Specifically, what makes NRC different to the other competitions in the UK within the rocketry world is that we're an entry-level competition, and that means mid-power rockets. So don't take that as easy. By no means is NRC easy in any way. And in fact, the old adage that rocket science is hard still applies here. There are plenty of benefits about being in part of the entry-level competition, and that is that it gives you an opportunity to learn fast, learn quick, and fail. The best way to learn things is by failing. If you have a bigger society that enters into a competition such as Mac in Europe and you're a first or second year student that haven't done rocketry before, you might even be a mature student. But if you haven't done rocketry before, what you'll find is if you enter into one of these bigger competitions, the budgets will be at least 10 times bigger, I suspect, if not 20 or 30 times bigger. And what you'll end up finding is that all the senior students with all the experience find it very difficult to give you the opportunity to step up and the opportunity to take ownership of big parts of the project. That's purely because when the budget is so big and when the stakes are so high, it's very difficult to let someone that's got absolutely no experience have a go. The big point of NRC is because it's entry level and because it's relatively so cheap for societies to enable you to enter, you can enter as a group of first year students who have absolutely never entered a project or run a project before, and you can project manage it. You can entirely have ownership of your budget. You can decide what happens. And at the end of the day, if everything goes to complete it, and if nothing works and the rocket completely explodes on the pad, it does not matter because the cost of that rocket was essentially negligible in terms of your society's budgets. But all the experience you've gained in running projects all the working out how to do minutes of meetings, working out how to do systems engineering, like Josh has mentioned, working out how to just simply prepare hardware and test it, and then attend a launch day or a test campaign. This is all things that you get to learn in NRC that you don't necessarily get the opportunity to do elsewhere. And then the other thing that we have is technical reports. So as Josh mentioned, the whole design of the competitions, and particularly now that we're moving into particularly the 11th edition of NRC, is that they're designed to mirror industry. So a lot of the volunteer team are currently students themselves, but also some of us are in industry. So as you probably noticed, the name tag on my profile is STFC UKRI. I work in industry now. Josh works in industry. David's a PhD student. A lot of our volunteer team have now finished their undergraduates or masters, and they have worked on the side of industry. So what I'm saying is we've seen what industry's like, and we've been students very recently. So we're trying our best to design these competitions to mirror the way the industry works and the way that the day-to-day work in industry, particularly in engineering focus, happens. So that's why these things are built this way. And we'll get into more of that in a minute. So what's new for NRC this year? So if anyone attended NRC last year, I think it's fair to say it went pretty well. We had our first ever in-person competition, and that was a major change. And we're looking to build upon that this year. So as Josh has already mentioned in the comps wide meeting, one of the main things we're doing is focusing on systems engineering. Now, I want to just mention, I know Josh has just gone through a quick systems introduction in the main meeting, but it was extremely brief. We do not want anyone to be completely put off by the systems engineering aspects. I appreciate the documents might look a little scary on the first look if you've absolutely never touched systems engineering before. If you have entered NRC before, what you'll probably find is whilst they look slightly different in terms of the format, the actual content is completely the same. It's just they're written in a more formalized way. And the only reason for this essentially is to make it easier for you if you want to transition from doing something like NRC to moving into a job. If you're going into a job interview or you're looking for summer internships over the next coming months, what you'll probably find is that maybe 40–50% of the jobs in engineering at the moment are systems roles. And even if you're not directly in a systems role, it is highly likely that you'll still be dealing with systems aspects such as requirements. So this is why we've designed it in this way. To enable this, there will be plenty of extra teaching resources. We've got a training course on its way, so please do not worry if it looks absolutely alien to you. I guarantee by the end of the next couple of weeks, but definitely the end of the competition, you'll be extremely comfortable with this. And if you then go into things like final year group design projects or jobs in industry, you'll find that you actually have a major step up, an advantage compared to your peers. So things like job interviews and assessment centers, you'll already be completely familiar with these concepts. And that'll help you going forward. We've also got some deliverable changes, which we'll mention more on in a minute. I've already mentioned training courses, and I'll highlight some of them. And then we've also got some changes to the motor ordering. So we'll get to them in due course. So what is the challenge? Now, as we keep mentioning, this is designed to mirror industry projects. So to keep in with the systems engineering theme, we've tried to design NRC to mirror the way that things would work in industry as closely as possible. So the first thing we're bringing in this year is something called a mission requirements document. Essentially, this is a document with this year's competition-specific aspects to it. So while some things in rocketry stay the same, so for example, the way that the stability margin on your fins should work, the way that some of the structure requirements work, they all stay the same because they're fundamental, I guess, engineering or science principles. There are some things in the competition that change year on year. So for example, the altitude you're trying to fly to, the payload that you're trying to fly, anything that's this year specific is in the mission requirements document, or MRD for short. So what we find is that we have 3 documents this year, and I will go into that slightly more in a minute. But within the MRD, one of the biggest things is that the altitude we're aiming for, or the apogee, so the highest point in your ballistic arc, is aiming for 2,500 feet. So that is unchanged from last year, and we think that altitude worked really well. The reason for that is for 2 reasons. A, the NOTAM, or the Notice to Airmen limits, so essentially the altitude limits at Midlands Rocketry Club, is just over, I think it's around 3,500 feet. So if we're aiming for 2.5, it gives us a slight buffer in terms of people slightly overshooting it. If we set our apogee limit, so our target at 3,500 feet, then there's a good chance that people will be absolutely smashing through that apogee and will be breaching CAA law, which we do not want to do, A, because it's bad, but also B, because there's manned air flight at the Rocketry Club, there is an airstrip, and there are people flying actively on the day, so we do not want to be hitting them. The second reason is we are an entry-level competition flying mid-power motors. Basically, what that means is we fly G-class impulse motors, which is a very fancy way of saying it's a way of describing the amount of power a motor has in Newton seconds. But motors are classified by whether you need licenses and similar certifications to handle them and fly them. We fly on the most powerful motors you can possibly get without having any licenses. So that's a big benefit here because it opens up a load of technical backdoors that we can do. We can have a lot more flexibility with experimenting with designs. You can, if you want an alternative recovery system, you can. When it comes to higher power motors where there are UCRA certification requirements, then it gets a lot stricter and it's a lot harder to do that. But flying on these mid-power motors, we found over the years that 2,500 feet is about a good altitude to fly to where it's reachable by these motors and it's not too much of a stretch. Also, at the end of the day, we like flying high because it's fun. For context, 2,500 feet on a standard day with clouds will go above the cloud line. This is still very high, just for context. So some of the big changes we're bringing this year is the way that the payloads run. So this year, as you'll find in the MRD or the mission requirements document, you are being asked to design a launch vehicle or a rocket to facilitate a payload. Now, this payload is being referred to from now on as the customer's payload. Think of it as UKZ as being your customer. You are the launch vehicle provider. You are designing a rocket to take a payload that the customer is asking you to take to 2,500 feet apogee. So this means, and this allows us to facilitate the systems engineering aspects as well, as you would in industry, because you are being paid to, if you like to think about it, to take this payload to an altitude, and they have given you this document called the MRD that is giving you a list of all the requirements that they have to take this payload to this altitude. And now, the main reason for this is because one of the big bits of feedback we had last year was that the competition day was fantastic, but we had a launch report that was due after competition day about a month later, and teams found it a big thrill on the competition day. We had some mini awards, but then there was another long grind that people were either on holiday for, or they were just generally busy, or it was very sort of lackluster in the finish. So we want to finish the competition this year on the competition day. And to enable that, this is why we've made changes such as the customer's payload, because it allows us to complete the competition and announce the winner on the day, and there's no need to have a launch report after the fact. But we appreciate that we don't want to take away all the fun creativity out of the competition. If we just gave you a payload and all you had to do is build a launch vehicle, if you've never done it before, it might sound a bit daunting, but what you'll find is that with a bit of experience and a bit of practice, someone that's done rocketry before could probably build the launch vehicle for this payload in a couple of nights. That is not what we're aiming for here. You can have up to 15 people in your team. So we are still trying to keep the competition, let's say, challenging in some ways. So there will also be what's called a rideshare payload. Now, in the context of launch vehicles in industry, if you were to go and buy something like a launch slot on an Ariane 5, or I guess now the new Ariane 6, what you'll find is the main customer will have the majority of the space and the mass requirements in the payload bay, but there'll be a bit extra left over. So in the context of, say, the launch vehicle can take, I don't know, 1,000 kilos to orbit, the main payload will be maybe 950 kilos, but there'll be a leftover mass left on there. So what people often do to make the most bang for the buck for the launch vehicles, to make a bit extra money and give free or cheaper launch slots to people that, like universities that have a lot less money to pay for them, they'll put on what's called rideshare payloads. And these often come in the form of things like CubeSats. And you can look up this online later if you want to know more. But essentially, the rideshare payload will be a payload that you are designing, and we have given further requirements on this in the MRD in what that involves. So you are still having to design payloads this year, but we've given requirements for that are specified in the MRD, and they've been designed in a way that it allows us to complete the competition on the same day, on the competition day. And it ensures fairness, so it doesn't matter whether you launch first or last. And this is all designed in a way that it means that we can complete on the competition day to give a really nice satisfactory ending and present, hopefully, the trophy on the day to the winning team. So just a bit more and a sneak peek at the customer's payload. So these are a couple of images that have come out of the MRD, fresh off the press last night, thanks to one of our volunteers, Udam. On the left, you can see a couple of views of what essentially the payload will be. So as a reminder, this is what UK says will be providing you. You can see there are a couple of holes. So there's some access points for some of the electronics inside it. There is power options, and you'll be powering it either from the top or the bottom. And then on the right-hand side, you can see what we call the launch vehicle adapter. And again, this is a standard term used in industry. Essentially, you will be providing the launch vehicle adapter. Very soon, we'll be releasing the CAD files, and we'll probably go for STLs and step files. But if there are other formats, we'll try to facilitate them for you as much as possible. So do let us know. But what will happen is you will turn up on the day with your rocket ready. You will have already mechanically fastened the launch vehicle adapter to your rocket, and we will provide editable files so you can modify it in ways that you want if you'd like to make it fit your rocket in different ways. But we essentially really care, and I think I might put a laser pointer on this. There we go. Essentially, what we care is this inner face and the way this bonds here. So as you'll notice, this face here will roughly match up with this face here on the launch vehicle adapter. There's a little slot here to make sure it mounts at the correct angle, and that matches up here. There's also a cutout here for feeding through power through an XT30 connector. There are 3 bolts on these 3 sides that will then mount into the payload on these relative sides, and that's how the payload will mount in. The whole reason and design for this is to make things quick. So when you turn up to the competition day, you go through flight registration. Once you've passed that and an inspection, you'll be given a payload. You'll be able to integrate it within a set amount of time, and then you'll be able to go. The reason for you providing the launch vehicle adapter is that in theory, there should be no issues with compatibility. If you already got the launch vehicle adapter, we'll provide some form of STL for the payload that won't contain any of the inside parts, but it'll contain an exterior shape. So that way, if you want, you can 3D print a version for your own to check the fit. And this is all designed to ensure that we can increase the capacity for the competition day as much as possible for all teams. So now for the rideshare payload. So this is, again, it's the payload that you are designing, you are providing. So again, in the MRD, there are requirements in there for you that detail a bit more about what this payload is. But what we wanted to do is we were looking at all the other rocketry competitions, both around the UK and around the world. We were trying to think what payloads or skills do students not necessarily get taught or pushed to develop that we really value in both engineering and rocketry and beyond that aren't available at the moment. And the big thing that stood out to us was PCB design. So if you haven't done electronics before, do not worry whatsoever. We have plenty of teaching resources available to help you with this. But essentially what you'll be doing this year is you'll be designing and building your own flight computer. Now, hopefully that fills you all with a bit of excitement, but if not, do not worry at all, because we'll be there every step of the way. One of our volunteers, George, is the lead electronics engineer on a CubeSat mission, and he is right now finalizing a big training course on PCB design for you. So if you've never done this before, do not worry one bit. But essentially what will be happening is you will be designing a payload that, amongst other things, records its altitude. And this altitude will then be marked against the altitude that is recorded by the standardized payload that UKSEDS provides, which A gives, yeah, Lou, I'll respond that to you in a minute, which A will mean that all rockets are recorded by the same electronic circuit, which should standardize the altitude marking. But also B, it gives a nice point of comparison for your payloads. Now, when I say flight computer, it is completely legal to put in your own electronics that are homemade, so student research and developed, if they do not control the recovery. If they do control the recovery of the rocket, then yes, they have to be flight qualified. So essentially, this rideshare payload, when I say flight computer, it will be acting as a flight computer in the sense that it will be detecting apogee and it will be taking other types of measurements, but it will not be controlling the recovery of the rocket, which is essentially what the UCRA definition requires for it to be flown. If you would like to use it to control your recovery, there are ways in which we can explore this with UCRA, but I will forewarn you, it will require a lot of test launches to qualify it as a secondary redundant system. And it's likely something that teams won't go into unless they have a lot of experience and, I guess, time and money to do so. But what it will do is give a great stepping stone and opportunity for teams to take this further forward. So say you're entering NLC this year, what you might find is that you develop a flight computer for NRC, you develop all the skills that go along with it to make the flight computer, then potentially as either part of NRC, outside of it, or as part of Project Odyssey, you can launch it and qualify it with UCRA. And then in the future, this can be used for things like Mac. So hopefully societies start to develop their own computers and we start relying on commercial kits. That would be really nice. But again, the only thing that we can't do with homemade flight computers, if they haven't been flight qualified, is use them to control recovery. There is absolutely no reason why you can't put a flight compute an electronics board in your rocket that does everything but control the recovery circuit, and that's student made and built. Because essentially that's what everyone's done for years and years in the past. It's just they may not have formalized it to a PCB. It was likely on something like stripboard. Lou, let me know in the chat if that makes sense to you. But in the meantime, I will skip on. So, timeline. Awesome. So, timeline for this year. So, today, hopefully you've noticed, is the 5th of October. So, today is competition's launch day. The next thing in the timeline is what's called the preliminary design review, so the PDR. So, this year we've slightly changed the deliverables format, which we'll go into a bit more in a minute. But your first review this year is going to be a PDR in November. And again, we've made this change to bring NRC in line with the other competitions and also in line with the way that organizations such as the European Space Agency do reporting and reviews. And there are also going to be, on the same deadline, motor orders. And I will go into that in a bit more in a couple of slides' time. Next up is going to be the TDR in February. As you'll notice, if you've entered NRC before, essentially the PDR will be replacing what was the IOD, so the initial outline design. The critical design review will be replacing partially the design and build report. And you'll notice that the CDR is a bit earlier than before. Then we've got the manufacturing review in April. So essentially this is more or less designed so that by April, so in theory, just around Easter and hopefully before Easter, you will have built your rockets this year, or at least you'll have almost finalized them. And this reason has been brought in basically to ensure that teams are more prepared this year. It's helping facilitate that, but also it will enable us to be a lot more ahead on the game in terms of passing teams with flight readiness reviews. We're expecting more teams to turn up to the competition day this year, which means that we need teams to be a lot more prepared. And we think this reporting will help that. Now, don't worry, this doesn't bring in more paperwork, so we'll go to that in a minute. The flight readiness review is something that we had in last year, and it went really well. So we're keeping that exactly how it is. So this is 2 weeks before the launch day. It is an unmarked deliverable. It is purely pass or fail. And essentially, if you've built your rocket, you've painted it, and you've done all the tests that you should have done in all the previous reports, this will be an absolute breeze for you, and you may even be able to just copy slides from the previous reports. And then the competition date. So we are delighted to already announce the competition day date. So we will again be flying at Midlands Rocketry Club, and we'll go into a few more details on that later in both this presentation and in the year. So the competition day. These are a couple of pictures from last year. So the one on the left is, I think, some of the Bristol members in front of the big NRC banner. For context, that is a 3-meter long banner, so it's quite hard to tell in the picture, but that is at the launch site. The picture on the right is most of the participants that attended on the day at the welcome safety briefing, and that is in the paddock. So you'll find out plenty more about these details later, but essentially we have 2 sites on the competition day. One is the launch site, where obviously you launch the rockets, you prepare the motors. The other is the paddock, and that's where you have the sponsors. There's a sponsorship exhibition like NSSC, if you've ever been to that. There's also a workshop for teams, and there are presentations, such as safety briefings. The paddock is actually a wedding venue, so it's a very nice building. And there is a couple of other treats that will be there this year as well. One of those things are burgers. So those of you that attended NRC last year, we had Full Flavor Behavior come and do catering for us. We are already very excited to announce that they have already confirmed that they'll be coming back. So those of you that liked the burgers last year, they're coming back again this year. They were about £10 for burger and fries, depending on which one you went for. So they were already doing mates rates for us compared to what they normally charge. And that will be a great treat for us to all look forward to. The other thing is that we've also confirmed our first sponsor for this year, and that is Rocktail UK. So the footage that you see on the right in the GIF, this is 2000 frame rate a second footage from Rocktail's high-speed camera. In that GIF, you can actually see the motor igniter go off, and then a couple of seconds later, the rocket motor ignite and the rocket take off. For context, this whole thing occurs in about half a second in full speed. Um, and we'll be working with Rockshell to get some more brilliant footage for you all this year as well. So just to go over, so these are the current sponsors and supporters for NRC. So we're delighted to already have Rockshell on board as our first bronze sponsor. And then we've also got Full Flavor Behavior back with the burgers. MRC will be hosting us again, which is fantastic. UCRA, who are the logo in the middle, will be providing us with range safety officers. Rockets and Things and Wizard Rockets will also be back again, helping us with motor supplies, and they will hopefully be attending on the day with their shops like we did last year for any last-minute purchases of equipment that were needed. That worked really well last year, and we're hoping to continue that partnership again into this year. So for deliverables, these are the deliverables that we mentioned in the timeline earlier, and this is the formats for them. So we've tried to design this in a way that we're not bringing in extra paperwork, and we want it to be a nice mixture between getting experience on your end for writing reports and doing presentations, whilst also not making it a huge extra workload on you on top of your degrees, which I'm sure everyone's really busy with, whether it be actually working on them or doing other things such as partying. So the first deliverable is the PDR. This is going to be a 10-minute recorded presentation. So what's actually going to be quite short and sharp, but what we're going to do is we're going to provide templates for all of these things. So we'll guide you through within the templates what we're expecting to see within them. So it's not completely open-ended, so you don't need to worry about that. And what you'll find is that will actually be reasonably sensible. What you'll find is that each of the reports, if you follow what's in the templates, you will score very well on. If you completely ignore the template, you will not score well on, not because we don't like the look of the reports, but because it's likely to not contain the content that the mark schemes are looking to mark. The next up is the CDR. So we've keeping this as a written report. So those of you that have entered before, the DBR used to be the main report, and some teams used to write 10 pages, and some teams genuinely submitted over 70 pages to us. So this year, there is a maximum page limit of 30 pages. That does not mean you have to write 30 pages. We're just capping it because we got, to be honest, really fed up of marking reports that were pushing 70 to 100 pages long. This will be the main report that is written, and we've kept it because we think there's a lot of value in doing written reports, because we've noticed that some teams are really good at writing them, and some teams have really poor grammar, really poor formatting, and generally haven't explained things well. So we want to keep that in because we think it's still a really good skill to develop for teams. Next up, the manufacturing report. This will be another 10-minute presentation. So as you'll notice, the top three, these are all March reports, and we'll go into the details of those a bit more, and they're detailed even further in the documentation. But these are the three reports that essentially contribute to half the marks for NRC this year. The final one that's deliverable for you is the FRR, or the Flight Readiness Review. This is unmarked and it's purely pass-fail. So if essentially what this means is, if you pass it, you're going to be invited to come and fly on the day. If you fail it, you can still attend the day, but you won't be able to fly. There are, as teams found last year, potentially opportunities to resubmit, but put it this way, if all 50 teams enter this year and all 50 fail, it's very difficult for us to process 50 resubmissions in the matter of a week. If all of you pass except one or two teams, then we have a bit more opportunity to work with you to help you get your rocket over the line to pass that flight risk review. The main things we're checking in that FRR, if you're starting to get worried, is purely safety things. So we're looking at, are your fins glued on correctly? Is your recovery system set up correctly in a way that it will deploy safely? It's nothing to do with your payloads. It's purely basically a safety check to check that your rocket is ready. And again, if you followed the reports correctly, if you've been building throughout your CDR and your PDR, if you've finished your manufacturing by the manufacturing report, you should have had plenty of opportunities to get feedback from our volunteer team and our range safeties. So there shouldn't be any concern with that FRR. So it should just be a tick box exercise. The whole reason it's there is to catch things that necessarily wouldn't have been caught until you turn up on the day. For example, your rocket could be almost complete, but you've forgotten your launch lugs. And it might be that if you turn up on the day and you forgot to put your launch lugs on, you're absolutely screwed because no one has any spare, or no one has a drill, or you need a particular tool. The FRR should catch that you have, whether you have or not have not got those launch lugs installed, for example. And that is the whole point of it. So it's both a good exercise for you, hopefully, but also for us to check the team turn up prepared and ready to go. And we actually had a lot of positive feedback about it last year, and teams didn't find it too much of extra paperwork and documentation. So as you mentioned, templates will be provided for all deliverables. None of them are currently available on the website yet, but given that the first one's not till the end of November, we do have a little while. The first thing that we'll be working on next will be sorting the templates out. So don't worry, you'll get plenty of notice and heads up on this. And when they are made live, we'll send out an email to all teams. As before last year, we're going to continue with the submission points through the website. That worked really well. Essentially, you go onto the NRC page, click on the submissions page, and then there are dedicated pages for each deliverable submission. They automatically close when the deadline comes up. That's not something that we close based on how we feel, whether we're feeling generous or not. There is a time deadline on them, and those pages will just automatically turn to private when the deadline hits. So please make sure that you're on time with those submissions. What it does do though is when you upload it, it gives you a confirmation on screen, and it will also send a confirmation email to you. So there should be no issues with receiving them incorrectly. I will mention, because we had it pop up a couple of times in the past, we do not accept email submissions. And the only reason for that is if we're trying to process something like 50 submissions at once, and we get emails into our main Rocketry inbox all the time, there's quite a reasonable chance that your submission gets lost somewhere in the paper trail, and that's not something we want to do. What happens essentially is when you submit through the website, it automatically gets put in our cloud-based software, and then it means that we have someone, it pops up and we know that that needs to be marked. So if you've submitted it through the submission point, there is no way that will be missed essentially. As for extensions, these are considered in extenuating circumstances, but they're not granted by default. So please aim to make sure to go for the submissions anyway on the correct deadlines. If you are looking like you're going to be late, please get in contact in advance of the deadline. Don't wait until after the deadline has passed to email us, because what we do within our team is we will look at how many submissions have come in, and then we'll allocate the marking and workload accordingly. And we will try and aim to get feedback out, ideally within 2 weeks maximum within the submission deadline. If you suddenly start emailing us a week past the deadline saying, oh, whoops, sorry, we got really busy with something or other and couldn't do it, can we now submit another 30-page report, please? It gets very difficult for us as a team to mark them and get them back to you promptly. So if it's looking like you're going to be late on the deadline, please get in contact in advance of the deadline, because then we can make sure we plan the marking workload on our end for you as well. As a reminder, our team are volunteers. Some of us, like me, have a day job. Some of us are students, but all of us are extremely busy. So we can't just drop everything and mark an extra 20 reports if people are late. So some of the support that's available to you already. So these 3 courses that are already on the website, I highly advise you go and look at them already. Looks like we forgot to change on the pictures. So the courses available are, the first one is Introduction to Arduino. So for those that you don't know, this is roughly a C-based programming language, and it's used for microcontrollers. So this is likely to be extremely helpful for you for building these flight computers. So the PCB training course that is coming very soon, within the next couple of weeks, will be following on from the Arduino course. So this is a prerequisite. If you've done Arduino before, you don't necessarily have to do the PCB course, but we'll be using the same circuit and building on the same knowledge that's taught in this course. So please go and do that if you're going to be working on the electronics part of your team. The next one, which we clearly forgot to change the picture, so sorry about that, is an introduction to LaTeX. So LaTeX is essentially a fancy, think of it as a language for making pretty documents. It's like using Microsoft Word, but with a bit of code to make things look a bit prettier. It's a skill that's often used in research, particularly academia, and sometimes industry for writing papers. So if you've ever seen your lecturer put out a paper that looks a bit funky in format, quite pretty, but you don't quite know how they've made it in Word, it's probably because they've used LaTeX or Overleaf, which is a tool that's used for LaTeX. That course is also live, and it will be very useful for you for doing your CDRs. So we recommend you go and have a look at that in advance of the CDR deadline. And the other one that's also live is the Project Odyssey Rocketry 101 course. So if you've never done Rocketry before and you want to get up to speed really quickly with the basics, I really recommend you spend a bit of time going through this course, because it will go over things like what is the stability margin? It'll go over what are launch lugs and how does recovery systems work? And it's a really good initial start to it. It will not give you the whole answers to NRC, but it will give you a good foundational start. And it will also make it easier for you as a team to discuss technical aspects as well. So motors, we mentioned there was a change on motors. If you remember on the timeline, there's also a deadline with the PDR to submit motor orders. Now, historically, we've had a lot of issues with getting this quantity of motors in the UK. That is purely because the UK amateur rocketry market is actually very small. So if we have 50 teams looking to get a 2-grain G-class Cesaroni White Thunder, for example, then there is simply not enough supply in the UK to get these. Due to certain political events happening in other parts of the world, all the raw materials used for making motors, it's currently being funneled into things that are not amateur rocketry based. And you can probably read into that by what I'm saying, where they're really going. That means essentially the lead time on motors are minimum 12 months now and getting even worse. Having spoken to suppliers, we've actually already preemptively ordered most of the motors for this year, with the scope to order a couple more last minute if we need to, but we need at least 6 months notice for this. So the first thing is, not a single team this year will be allowed to provide their own motor. Now, there's a good reason for this, and it's because motors can be inherently dangerous to store and handle on your own. They can also be illegal to do so if you don't have the proper licenses. They can also be illegal to transport without the proper licenses. So to keep things simple, UK SEDS and our range safeties will be doing all the motor procurement and handling until the competition day. This makes it really easy for you because it means you don't have to worry about getting safe storage for explosives at university. You don't have to get motor handling certifications. You don't need to get motor transport certifications. So it makes it easier for you in that aspect. What it also does is it means that there should be hopefully no muck-ups with motor orders. Last year, one of our suppliers had a big, let's say, muck-up a week before the competition because people had placed triple orders, double orders. Some people have placed it over the phone and it got lost. Some people have placed it on a website and then it got lost. We don't want to have that again. So to make things really simple, there will be 2 motor orders placed this year, both by UK STEDs. One will be placed with Wizards, one will be placed with Rockets and Things. But all of the communication about motors will be going via UK STEDs, so our volunteer team, and the suppliers we've got really great relationships for. What this means for you is that hopefully, come the competition day, all the motors are there waiting, ready to go, and there are no muck-ups. We will endeavour to get a couple of spares as well, just in case, but it will make things a lot easier. What it will also hopefully do is it will mean that all the motors that you want are available. Last year, we found teams were trying to order motors as late as a couple of days before the competition, and naturally, there weren't any left in the UK because we'd ordered so many of the same type. So what will happen is, over the next month or so, you'll be doing the early designs for your rockets. Through your simulations, such as OpenRocket, you'll work out very quickly which motor or motors you would like to have. So by the PDR, and this is the reason why it's being formalized this year, you will have a very good idea of what motor you would like. So at that deadline, you will place an order at the same time as the PDR submission for your motor. Then what we'll do is we'll contact the suppliers and work with them to do our very best to select the correct motors for you and get them into the UK imported in time. So this gives us as much notice as possible to get this sorted. We will then send out confirmation emails to everyone to confirm that you have got these motors, so there's no need for you to worry at that point about them. We may ask for backup options as well, or get back in contact with you if there is a shortage. Historically, some motors haven't been available in the UK just because certain raw materials have been used for other use cases, let's say, in other parts of the world. So only certain types have been available. What we'll do is we'll have another catch up with suppliers and we'll get you another list of motors that are available at the moment in terms of raw supplies and confirm these to you. And I'll do that over the next week or two. But as a general rule of thumb, if they're available on their websites, they are generally in stock at the moment. I think that covers it, but if anyone's any further questions about that, feel free to ask at the end. Just a quick note on some other bits. Hey Josh, have we got 15 minutes? I'll take that as yes. Outside support, this is all covered in the rulebook, so we're not going to cover it too in depth here, but just to make you aware, there are some allowed and not allowed for what's covered this year. And again, this is just to make things fair and consistent across the teams. As for scoring, just to briefly mention, you can spend a lot more time looking at this if you'd like in the rulebook, but the competition this year is marked half on your deliverables and half on the competition day performance. And we think this gives a nice comparison between all the work you do in all the deliverables in the year building up to the competition day, but it still leaves everything to play for on the competition day. And you'll find that there are extra marks for things like how prepared your team are, how well you integrate into your the customer's payload into your rocket, and along with some of the data requirements. I'm not going to go into these too in details, but we've provided breakdowns on where the marks will go on the PDR, the CDR, and the manufacturing report. One thing you will notice that I will point out is that even on the PDR, there are already marks for testing. Essentially, we are trying to encourage you to get building and get testing as early as possible. Now, you'll notice it's only 5% in the PDR because it is so early, but we want you to start building and start playing and getting hands-on with this tech early. Particularly with things like PCB design, you'll likely want to start breadboarding components, so getting them on a bench and testing them out before you formalize it into full boards. So we really suggest and want to encourage you to get going early. Same with CDR, you'll see things such as manufacturing and testing coming up in this report as well. In other words, by the PDR and the CDR, we're expecting you to start building. You don't have to wait until after the CDR and after you've got feedback from us to then start to think about these things. If you started to build early, we can give you feedback on the way that you're manufacturing things and on the way you're testing them. And then when it comes to the manufacturing review, you'll see that it's really heavily focused on things such as the manufacturing and the testing, which is probably not surprising when it's called the manufacturing review. But generally, we're expecting the rocket to be 95% built by the manufacturing review. And this is purely because that it gives us a bit more time to give you feedback on the way that you've manufactured certain aspects of your rocket if they are unsafe. And it gives you plenty of time between Easter and May to get your changes made, which hopefully means that everyone turns up with much higher quality rockets this year and a lot more prepared and a lot less stressful flight readiness reviews. And just once more, we'll mention the altitude marks. So we're aiming for the 2,500 feet apogee. As you'll notice, the marking is completely linear between 0 and 2,500 feet. It's also linear the other side of it to an extent, and then it drops off to completely 0 when you hit 3,500 feet. That is purely because there is a NOTAM at 3,500 feet for Midlands. So if you go to 3,501 feet, you have breached that NOTAM and we've entered into manned airspace, which is not allowed. So that's why the marking heavily discourages it in that way. So this year, these are our documents. These are all live currently now on the NRC website, so we recommend you go and have a look at them. If you have any questions, feel free just to drop us an email. But the rulebook will be covering the general scope and the background of the project, so it's worth a quick skim first, I'd say. The mission requirements document, as we've mentioned, covers specific requirements and details about this year's competition. So that will contain things such as the altitude you should be flying to, details on the customer's payload integration, details on the rideshare payload. Then the other document we have is the technical specification. This has just been renamed to bring it in line with the other documents across the competitions. For those of you that have entered before, it's the technical guidelines, basically. Nothing fundamentally has changed in the technical guidelines except the formatting. And we've added 1 or 2 more requirements in there just to get you familiar, just based off experience we've had in the last couple of years of competitions. So there's a couple of bits on radio licensing and shot chord lengths that have been added, but fundamentally that is the same. What you'll find though is that there are formalized requirements in there now. So whilst it already said, you must be able to bend your fin to this amount by this factor, it now says that formally in a requirement rather than in a very loose way. But we've still kept it extremely descriptive in there, and some sections don't even have requirements, they're just descriptive. Again, that's meant to be your Bible. It's meant to be helping you build a safe and reliable rocket. It's not necessarily meant to be competition specific. So I feel like I've been talking a lot, so I'll try and whiz through this quickly so we have time for questions. But what support is available for you? You're probably wondering. So the first bit are some tips from us. We recommend you go away and the first thing you do is make a plan based on the timeline, because the timeline is quite quick this year. And that's purely to make sure that everyone is ready for the competition day as much as possible. So we recommend you go make a plan based on the timeline, stick to it and check it often. I suggest if you have a weekly meeting, check your progress over the last couple of weeks compared to your plan, and then you can adjust your pace and speed accordingly. As we've already mentioned, test, build, and manufacture early. The quicker you do it, the more opportunity you have to iterate and build extra prototypes, and the better your rocket will be at the end. The deliverables, we found teams that have done the best, they start at least 2 weeks in advance. If you look at it with 1 week to go, you might find in the template that there are aspects you haven't even done yet, such as certain tests or this, that, and the other. So we'll do our best on our end to provide the templates as soon as possible. I think our volunteer team will be working on them next, so you'll find that all of them get released very quickly. But what it means is have a look at those templates early and start working them early, because it makes for a lot less stressful deliverable writing experience. Also, if you have things like exams and coursework due at the same time, if you start them earlier, it makes it a lot less stressful because you can do it little and often. Finally, ask for help. We will be having a dedicated channel on UK Rocketry Discord page, which is new for this year. The uni Discord page is a lot older than we are, and we're using it to come in line with the other rocketry competitions, which will help bring you also with networking with others. We're just finalizing the setup of that with the admins, so we'll release some more details for that shortly. Again, we will put a link on the website and mention it shortly. That the link there on the screen takes you just to the general Discord page. There's plenty of other content on there, such as the other competitions and general discussion forums, but it's a really great place to be, which is why we want to use that more now. We will be using that for general technical help, discussions, competition day specific questions, and we'll be possibly moving towards using that a little more than the Rocketry email. But by all means, if you have specific questions, still feel free to email us in the usual ways. The contact details are on the website. Again, as we mentioned, we're just finishing the setup with admins. We're trying to change the format a little bit. So before we start using it, just give us a couple of days and we'll put an invite link again on the website when it's ready. As for funding, so already we can confirm that the Orbex Gender Diversity Grant is still available. So for anyone that meets the requirements on the screen, you'll be able to apply for up to 50% of the cost of rocket back, capped to £150. Depending on how sponsorship goes for this year, it's already looking really promising because we've already got our first bronze sponsor. And depending on how that goes for the rest of the year, we hope to be able to provide again another bursary similar to last year. But we can't confirm that obviously until we've got the money in pocket. What we'll do as a volunteer team is we'll prioritize funding the competition day first, because having spoken to teams last year, they found that a lot more beneficial. And then any money left over will then look to move to a bursary to support you. But generally, we find these projects cost around about in the order of £300 for a society to run. If you're a team of 15, that turns out to be £20 membership, and then the rocket's covered. So historically, we found teams haven't struggled too much in supporting these projects. Right, other opportunities. This is a really big one, and we really recommend you go and have a look at it now. We are co-organising a big training skills day with Launch Access Limited that's happening on the 9th of November. And essentially, it'll be an in-person training day at BMFA Buckminster. We're going to have, I think Ben's slogan is we have something like 200 years of experience that are going to be there on the day. Essentially, every single aspect of rocketry design, from structures to recovery to aerodynamics, will all be covered on the day by experts. Our range safety officer will hopefully be there. I'm hoping the motor vendors will be there, and plenty of other people in the amateur rocketry world. This will be hopefully recorded and live streamed if you can't make it, but it depends slightly on the quality of the Wi-Fi. We really recommend you go in person because we are hoping to have in-person demos. The event is free to attend. You just have to sort your own travel. We're hoping to be able to sort a travel bursary, but it's unconfirmed at the moment. But the reason the event is free to attend is because it's been very kindly funded by the UK Space Agency's Space Rule Grant. So we really recommend you have a look at that. There is a link at the top of the screen, which we appreciate is a little long. If not, go on the Eventbrite link for UK Sets competitions where you found this registration, and the tickets are available there anyway. Again, any questions, just ask us at the end. The other things available to you are Project Odyssey. So one of the parts of Project Odyssey is the Rocketry 101 training course. And again, there's a dedicated page on the UK Sets website explaining more about that. And then finally, coming soon, so we've got plenty more training courses in the works. So we've got the PCB one that's coming out soon. There's a systems engineering one that Josh is making that's coming out very soon. And we've got a big long list of others that we're going to be working on and prioritizing this year. And the whole reason is we want to provide good quality, free education to our teams that are tailored for the competitions. We've also been working on recording a quick podcast with last year's winning team. This will be covering their experiences and top tips on how to get started in each area of the designs. So we really recommend you go and listen to this. This will be probably coming out in the next 2 weeks, so keep an eye out for that. Again, we'll drop you an email when it does. And there'll be the Discord support channel for questions. So I feel like I've been talking for absolutely ages. Does anyone have any questions? And while I wait for people to do that, I'm going to have a drink. Feel free to either unmute or pop them in the channel. Great. So from Alex, are there any fees societies have to pay to enter the competition? So no, there are no fees for entry fees in that sense. So we want to keep NRC as open to teams as possible to give the most opportunities that are possible. The one fee that you will be paying is the motor order fee. So when it comes to the PDR deadline, when you submit both your PDR and your motor orders, what we'll do is on Eventbrite, we will have a ticket that you can buy essentially for each motor type. I think we're probably going to work with the suppliers to also be able to provide a couple of extra bits like cases and things for them as well. And essentially what we'll do is we'll just put the exact price that the supplier is charging us on there. So we're not looking to make a profit on them. We're just essentially passing the money through UKZ to the suppliers. The only reason for this is because one or two of the suppliers are a little old-fashioned in the way that they deal with orders because it's still amateur and it's often done cash in hand at rocketry events. So to avoid money getting lost or people not the suppliers not quite knowing if they've been paid or not, we're going to put in that one order as Yuki said, and we're going to make that one payment. So there's no entry fee, there's just the motor fee. And that's a fee that you would have paid anyway because you would have had to buy a motor. It's just rather than making it direct to suppliers, you'll make it via UKZ. What we will mention as well that motor fee is non-refundable once you've made that payment. And that's purely because the supplier will have to make the order to the manufacturers and import them to the UK. So it's unfair to make them import 25 of a certain type of motor and then us to not actually use them. What will happen is if you decide not to make that use that motor, we will keep that within UK SEDS, and then for next year we'll use them as a sort of bursary. So for teams that are particularly hard on funds, if they're really struggling, we will make those motors available as bursary motors, and then if they're not used, we'll make them available as backup motors on the day. That's not because we're trying to profit. That's purely because we have to have a fair share of pain with the suppliers. It's not fair for them to go and buy 25 motors and take the financial hit of buying that many motors for us and then not actually sell them. So if you place the order at Christmas, assume that that money is non-refundable, please. Awesome. Does anyone else have any other questions? I'll give it a couple of moments, and if not, I'm assuming that's Josh chasing us up to come back to the main channel.
No, I'm just seeing. I'm not chasing you up. You got a couple more minutes left. Just seeing how everything's going.
Yeah, no worries at all. Sure. What I'll do is I'll just keep an eye on chat. Again, if anyone has any questions, just pop them in the chat or feel free to unmute. But essentially this year we're looking as well organized as we ever have done for NRC. So I think we're in for a really great year. Given that we've already got our first sponsors on board and a bit of money left over from last year, we are fully confirmed to go ahead with the competition day. So that's not in doubt this year, which is fantastic news. Again, having the burgers back has made everyone, particularly Josh, very excited. Some people may have had multiple last year. We're not trying to bully anyone, but they were just that good. And what we're going to do is we'll work with Full Flavor Behavior to try and get a menu up as soon as possible so teams get as excited as possible. Again, hopefully the documents are as detailed as possible and they provide all the info you need. What we'll do is we will make revisions to them, as Josh has mentioned earlier, and we'll update the names of them if revisions need to be made. So if there are requirements in there that are unclear, which I appreciate, they have been written, given we have spent about a month and a half writing them, but some of them are more last minute than others. So if there are some that are unclear to you, please just drop us an email or pop something on the Discord when it's available and challenge them to us, because if it's not clear to you, it's likely not clear to another team. So we can go ahead, we can revise that requirement, we can add extra description and guidance beneath it in the requirement text, and then we can make it as clear as possible. Hopefully we'll be seeing a lot more requirement verification in the reports. So if you've not understood it correctly, we'll be able to notice that in the reports. But again, if you have questions, just drop us an email. Josh, while you're here, are you going to cover how to register in the last bit on your side?
Oh, good shout. Yes, it's worth including. So I might do a screen share and run through that. That's something that we need to do. Cool.
Sure.
I'll just share my screen and run through that. So it's not on the PowerPoint, but we'll do an example.
Yeah, no, they're
I'm
all
gonna
on
quick,
the home pages of the competitions. So
yeah, spotted. So I'm going to quickly go check on SDC, make sure they're all good, and then at that we'll close the room. So you'll get a message of sort of like 10 seconds or something like that.
sure,
Cool.
got you. So I'm just keeping an eye on the chat. So if anyone has any further questions, just let me know. If not, all of these documents that we've mentioned are on the brand new NRC homepage. So if you've not seen that, what I might do is just quickly load it now. As you'll notice, my screen is really slow at loading, so just give me a moment. But if you go to the UKSED's homepage, there we go, you'll see I'm actually signed in, so I'll just log out of the website. So if you go to the UKSED's website, go over to get involved, and you can either go to the competitions homepage here, or you can click on the NRC link directly. So if you click on that, it will take you to the NRC homepage. And as you'll see, hopefully, you'll notice that this has been completely revamped from last year. So we are no longer using the community hub. So if you've used that before, please don't even bother looking at it because it's a load of garbage. We're going to use the main website now completely, and there's plenty of extra benefits that come with that. So you can have a browse of the homepage, and you'll notice, which Josh will cover in a minute, the registration form and plenty of other bits. But in the documentation section is where you'll find all the documents for this year that are already live. And when that loads based on my Wi-Fi, so what you'll find is the rulebook, and these are all integrated directly within the website.